meetings as a reason for students to go back to full in-person learning. But instead of school counselors being used to instill comprehensive programs, school counselors across the state have been often thrown administrative duties such as facilitating remote schedules, transferring students between remote learning and in-person learning, and spending large amounts of time tracking grades and contacting parents of failing students. If school counselors were allowed to find creative ways to implement comprehensive programs during the pandemic, I truly believe there would have been a trickle-down effect of students being more engaged and more successful academically. Maslow's hierarchy of needs outlines that students need safety and a sense of belonging before they can learn and grow. Yet we were drowned with administrative tasks. We were not always able to be receptive to those needs. School counselors could have provided small counseling groups, meeting in socially distanced groups in the school buildings, providing needs surveys to gather information on what students needed most, and implementing meaningful classroom lessons and Zoom calls with students. Some of us were able to do these things while also doing the other tasks asked of us, but it was also a year where burnout was in full force. School counselors, like many teachers and administrators, put their own wellness aside this year to work many more than contracted hours. For months, we have watched as parents and school board members have discussed that students are struggling with anxiety, depression, and isolation during the pandemic. However, we still have not begun to mandate comprehensive school counseling programs and a reasonable ratio for school counselors in Kansas, addressing the issues at their root. This brings me to my final discussion. What can you do as a committee to enhance mental health in schools for all students? Number one, mandate a ratio of 250 students to one school counselor. The hiring of more school counselors would increase the ability of a school to establish rapport with all students, creating meaningful and productive relationships with adult advocates. Adhering to the recommended ratio results in higher graduation rates, less disciplinary incidents, and increased school attendance. This ratio has also been shown to provide a more positive school climate. If this ratio were mandated, school counselors would have the time and resources to work directly with all students and help them to feel more connected to their school community. School counselors have more important roles in the school community, their school community, and often have many more students on their caseload than the recommended 250 to 1 asker ratio. The current average ratio in Kansas is actually 431 to 1. This would be comparable to a teacher having 50 to 60 students in a classroom. That would be completely unacceptable. The ratio is also important because data suggests that students in smaller schools feel more connected to their school than those who attend larger schools. As one can imagine, with large populations, it's more difficult for the adults in the building to establish and maintain positive relationships with all students. These ratios play a particularly impactful role in the school careers of low-income and potential first-generation college students who often must rely on their school counselors for support, but also often experience trust issues with adults in their building. This can be mitigated by responsive counseling services when the school counselor takes the time to explain and scaffold the processes of post-secondary experiences. Our state is listed on the American School Counseling Association website as providing too few counselors to students of color and low-income families in our state. Number two, mandate comprehensive school counseling programs. When programs are fully implemented and school counselors are allowed the time and resources to work directly with students, students earn higher grades and are more prepared for post-secondary success, and the programs create more positive climates in their schools than those who do not have comprehensive programs. Oftentimes, school counselors are faced with being asked to take on responsibilities that ASCA outlines as non-school counseling activities. These include things like building a master schedule, test coordination, and student discipline. All of these activities take away from the time that the school counselor could be spending directly working with students and can actually be destructive to the relationship school counselors attempt to build with students. When the role of the school counselor is inconsistent or contradictory, it creates a barrier to the trusting relationship and an impossible mission for school counselors. School counselors can't discipline a student, then try to establish a trusting and non-judgmental relationship. Holland states, school counselors experience multiple and conflicting roles. They are tasked with college counseling, course planning, scheduling, facilitating communication between students, teachers, and parents, and acting as mental health counselors. Providing all these services to all students is virtually impossible, especially when counselors have high caseloads. 80% of school counselors' time should be spent on direct services, such as instruction, appraisal, and counseling. These direct services are delivered through core curriculum, individual student planning, individual and group counseling, and responsive services. No more than 20% of a school counselor's time at work should be spent on planning in support of their program. All of these factors play a role in how much of a school counselor's time can be spent directly with students, and if the students can trust that a school counselor will be a consistent adult in their lives. Hire more school counselors and ensure that all students have access to a licensed school counselor in their building. While other mental health professionals in a school community are valuable, they do not possess the educational preparation to implement comprehensive school counseling programs and should never replace a school counselor. School counselors are required to possess a master's degree and are uniquely qualified to address all students' academic, social, emotional, and career development. School counselors are unique from other school personnel because they provide services to all students, which is different than social workers or school psychologists. While mental health liaisons can also be beneficial in school setting, their job is to connect students to long-term therapeutic resources and are not used for acute issues occurring during the school day. Each of these mental health professionals have a part to play, but in order to allow comprehensive programs to be implemented and the benefits to be reaped, more licensed school counselors are needed. School counseling programs are preventative in nature. We are working with all kids, even those who might not seem to have tier 2 or tier 3 mental health concerns. By doing this, we are able to curtail mental health issues early, teaching coping skills and showing students resources that can help when they do have needs arise. School counselors are one of the few preventative mental health resources we have at our disposal in schools, and we need to hire more. Because between 70 and 80% of adolescents with a mental health disorder are not receiving treatment, school counselors are often the first and sometimes only line of defense. Additionally, students who receive counseling services at school are much more likely to follow through with these services compared to only receiving community services. I appreciate your time and consideration of the proposals that I have put forward. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share my passion about the empowering work that school counselors are doing in the state of Kansas, and I am so glad that you know and value the work as well. I want to make sure that I take the time to say how proud I am of our teachers who have worked so hard this year to ensure continued success for students, even when given a near impossible task. I'm so proud of our administrators who have tried their best to advocate for their staff and to ensure that all needs are being met in their buildings. And also how proud I am of our students. I am amazed daily by their resilience, their understanding, and their insightfulness. It is a privilege to work with these teachers and students, and one I am truly grateful for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And for time purposes, would you mind sticking around in case we have questions for you later?
Absolutely.
That would be awesome. With that, I believe Mr. Smeaton has joined the call. Are you there, sir? I believe you're muted. Let me unmute you.
Okay,
Mr. Smeaton, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right. If you are ready, John is with the Kansas School Psychologist, and he has a presentation for us. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having us today and allowing us to present information regarding mental health in schools. And I know this year has been unlike any other, academically and mental health wise. So I'm Jonathan Smeaton. I'm the current government public relations rep for the Kansas Association of School Psychologists. Prior to entering the field of school psychology, I actually taught physical education classes in the school system. And I've also worked in addictions treatment. So got some community background as well. I'd like to start by just telling you a little bit about the profession of school psychology. As a Kansas school psychologist, the primary role is to foster student success. Our standards for professional and ethical practice enable us to leverage our extensive expertise to create positive change for all students and their families and schools, whether it's through direct provision of mental health services like direct counseling or group counseling, consultation with other staff members, other mental health professionals, or community service, intervention leadership roles, advocacy efforts. We use our skills to utilize our skills to create safe, inclusive, and accessible environments where all students thrive. When it comes to fostering student well-being, we have the most rigorous training and licensure standards in our state. The National Organization of School Psychologists, National Association, just came out with a new practice model, and I sent that. I don't want to try to, but there's 10 domains of practice that we're all very well trained in. We tend to get pigeonholed into the special ed evaluation piece, and that's a very important role. I don't want you to take that away from us or whatever, but I think that practice model shows that a lot of our skills and training go much deeper than being able to give a few tests and make recommendations as far as placement. School psychologists are an integral part of the mental health team in schools. Today we're just going to join with our colleagues from school counselors and school social workers to provide you with information regarding the impact of mental health on students. Again, the role of school psychologists is evolving. In addition to the evaluation for special education services, we're now tasked with providing mental health supports for students. This is a monumental task with the needs of our children and our families currently facing. Prior to this current school year, I have never heard a child express worry about getting sick. This year, I hear a lot of kids. We've been in school all year since September, and I've talked to a lot of kids, and what if I get COVID? What if my mom gets COVID? These are things kids are thinking about now that they weren't necessarily thinking about before. So they're worried about getting sick, or a beloved family member, or a parent dying, or a grandparent dying. Obviously, when kids are thinking about these things in schools, they're not engaged in instruction the way we would obviously like to see them do that. The Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, found that from April to October of this year, 2020, hospitals across the U.S. saw a 24% increase in the proportion of mental health emergency visits for children ages 5 through 11, and a 31% increase for children ages 12 to 17. These are our students. That was a national sample, and keep it in Kansas, but there's no reason to suspect that Kansas students aren't facing the same types of issues. I'm certain that the full effects of the pandemic will not be known for several years. We do know that both students and teachers are experiencing an unprecedented level of stress due to social isolation, conducting school online, worries about being sick, contracting COVID-19, loss of normalcy routine, loss of income due to job loss, layoffs in the family unit, and sadly, loss of relatives having passed away due to the pandemic. I have also included in my testimony a graphic to demonstrate some of the role school psychologists play in supporting mental health in our schools. And again, it's everything from evaluation to crisis to consultation, to program development, direct service, crisis response and intervention. There's a lot of things that school psychologists can do using objective data to help teams and kids be more successful in a school setting. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 1 in 5 children and adolescents experience a mental health problem during their school years. This data was collected prior to the global health pandemic that has resulted in social isolation, job losses, and over 4,300 deaths within the state of Kansas. The same report states that self-injurious behaviors and suicide are on the rise. This was, again, before the pandemic, particularly among youth. Unfortunately, estimates of up to 60% of students do not receive the mental health treatment they need due to the stigma or lack of access to services. Of those who do get help, nearly 2/3 do so only in school. Left untreated, these mental health concerns lead to increased treatment costs, addictions, dropping out of school, and suicide. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, Kansas has the 9th highest suicide death rate in the country among persons aged 10 to 24. Again, these are our students. not 24, but yeah. Research indicates that approximately 90% of people who have died by suicide were suffering from a mental illness at the time. Personally, I have conducted more suicide risk assessments during this school year than in my previous 4 years combined. The district in which I work has been in-person school all year. There's been a few days missed here and there for different quarantine situations, but we've been in school all year, and so we're able to do those risk assessments and come up with plans and intervene in those ways. The kids that are not in school, that has to be handled a little bit differently. Mentally healthy children are more successful in school and life. Research demonstrates that students who receive social, emotional, and mental health support achieve better academically. Mental health is not the absence of mental illness, but also encompasses social, emotional, behavioral health, and the ability to cope with life's challenges. We call that resiliency. Schools are an ideal place to provide mental health services to children and youth. Virtually every community has a school, and most children spend at least 6 hours per day there. School-employed mental health professionals, like school psychologists, school counselors, school social workers, school nurses, know the students, parents, and other school staff. They understand the system in which they work. This contributes to accessibility of service. In fact, research has shown that students are more likely to seek counseling and engage in services when they are available in school. Mental health services support the mission and purpose of schools, which is learning. School-based mental health services focus on the child within the school setting and on collaboration with families. These services range again from prevention and skill development to intervention, evaluation, referral, collaboration, and consultation and counseling. Providing this continuum of mental health services is critical to effectively addressing the breadth of student needs. Comprehensive mental health services are most effective when provided through a multi-tiered system of supports by school-employed mental health professionals. This multi-tiered model encompasses a continuum of need. Not every kid needs direct counseling services every day with a school counselor, but many kids do need supports in the classroom or things like that. This multi-tiered model encompasses a continuum of need, enabling schools to promote mental health wellness for all students. We can identify and address problems before they escalate or become chronic, and provide increasingly intensive data-driven services for individual students as needed. Access to adequate staffing of school-employed mental health professionals is essential to the quality and effectiveness of these services. As I stated previously, we will likely not know the full effect of the COVID-19 pandemic for several years. If we want to make progress in the area of mental health for our students, we must commit resources to getting people into these fields. School-based mental health professionals are all required to hold at least a master's degree in a respective field. School psychologists in Kansas and nationally must have a specialist, which is master's plus 30, specialist in education degree in addition to their master's degree. Additionally, all of the mental health professionals in schools have to be outside of providing mental health services. Again, school psychologists are tasked not only with the crisis intervention, the crisis response, but also with the special education evaluation piece. School counselors, I know the building I work in, a lot of our school counselors are asked to spend a lot of time on scheduling, and those are important tasks, but it's not the same as direct mental health supports and services. Our school social workers that I work with, they're a lot of times asked to help write behavior plans and do some of those things. They're very well trained and capable of doing those things, but again, that's different than providing direct mental health services and supports to students. The need for services is great and rising, especially considering the state has task force leading to additional requirements for these professionals. With legislature requiring schools to increase training and policies regarding things such as suicide and bullying, our roles expand even more. Some specific recommendations. We're often kind of asked, well, what can we do to help? So but I think specific policy recommendations would include continued funding and expansion of the Kansas School Mental Health Initiative. I did hear it was refunded with a little increase for this current school year, and it's expanded some. We would like to see that continue to grow and continue to be funded. Scholarship opportunities, we got to get more people into these fields. Several years ago, we came before you talking about the critical shortage of school psychologists, and we've been able to work through with the Kansas State Department of Education on getting more folks licensed to be school psychologists. But we're still not to where we would like to be. And I think things like tuition assistance for folks entering school psychology programs or school counseling programs to help fill that specific need. Loan forgiveness, reduced tuition, that would encourage people to enter the field. We hope, we think. And then we need to prioritize efforts to create safe and supportive school environments for all students. You know, we can do this by providing funds to integrate social emotional learning into the curriculum, adopt positive discipline and restorative justice practices, provide ongoing professional development, particularly related to toxic stress, adversity, trauma, resilience, improve school mental health services, and strive toward the recommended staff ratio of 1 school psychologist to every 500 to 700 students. And this is total student population, not just the number of IEPs or number of disabled students. That will allow us then to step outside that evaluation role even more and have an even greater impact on student mental health and well-being. So I just thank you for your time today and the opportunity we have to have this conversation about this very important topic.
John, thank you very much. Quick question from Representative Wolf Moore.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation, and especially thank you for all the work you do. I was going to ask you, but then you mentioned it briefly about the mental health pilot initiative that the legislature implemented a few years ago, that it connects you with the mental health professionals at the community mental health centers. Tell me a little bit what's worked about that and how it's been helpful. I like the program. I just want to hear directly.
Okay, so I like the program too. I'm gonna probably have to defer to some of my colleagues on this.
That's okay.
The district that I am working in currently is not involved in that program.
I was going to ask that.
So I don't want to speak from what I hear from other folks. It's working well, and we're able to get kids to the services in the community that they need. I speak on that personally because it's not something I have personal experience with. Is that fair?
That's fair. Maybe one of the social workers that, I don't know where they're from, but maybe one of those who are coming up will be able to speak to it.
I can also speak to it a little bit.
That'd be
this
great.
Is Lindsay. Yeah, we have a mental health liaison in our building. She's fantastic. We're, was this our second year, maybe third year in the program. It is awesome to have somebody to refer kids to directly, and for some of our students to receive services within the school day at our school buildings. That's been really helpful. I think what I would like to see, I guess, be careful with is I think when I hear that we need more mental health people in our buildings, a lot of times it's suggested that the mental health liaisons be those more, be the people that they hire. I think what I would say about that is that they work with few students. They do work with our most high-risk students, but when you really think about the MTSS model, we as school counselors are working with all students, and social workers and school psychs, work with more students as well. I think that would be my only caution, is when thinking about them, they don't replace the work of any of our school-based mental health professionals, and that's something that I've heard a lot suggested. Well, we just need more mental health liaisons. I would suggest hiring more school counselors that are working again with all students instead of that small portion of the population.
And if it's okay if I follow up on that, Mr. Chair. one of the reasons we did this, and I completely understand what you're saying, and thank you for that, is so that summers, weekends, so the way it is actually working in your school or your district is that it's someone you can sort of make a better referral or a better handoff to for some of your more serious cases, and they can see them on hours that maybe the counselor wouldn't be available. I think that was part of our thought anyway.
And absolutely, you're completely correct. They definitely work with them in the summer and in the evenings. That is absolutely true. I would also argue school counselors don't take much of a summer. I know we're working with a lot of those students, but definitely not in the direct counseling capacity that they are in the summers and in the weekends and all of that. So absolutely, you're completely correct in that assertion.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Can I speak really quickly?
Representative? Sorry, who is that?
This is Norella Munoz. I'm one of the
Hi.
school social workers. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. Go ahead.
Just had a little bit of an addition to make to what Ms. Brown was saying about the Mental Health Initiative program. I do agree with her that it is not a substitute for having school mental health personnel in the schools, but it is a very nice addition. I can tell you from experience working in a school where we do have a liaison, where we can just give that warm handoff to the community mental health center to refer students who are at much higher need. It takes a village to raise these kids. I don't think that the school is capable of taking care of all of the mental health needs of all of the students. And so this has been a really nice addition to be able to offer this to kids and families. And I really strongly encourage the legislature to continue to fund this program.
Very good. Okay. And we are certainly looking forward to hearing from you here in just a few minutes. So I appreciate that, definitely. Moving on with the Kansas school psychologist, Stacy Motti. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Wow.
All right. Good job. And I am actually not presenting. Everything that we presented was what Jonathan just presented. So maybe there's somebody else coming up. I will just tag on to the comments that were just made. We also have school-based mental health through Crosswinds Counseling and Wellness in our schools. But what we are finding, and it's a little bit different, I think it's a little bit different than being funded through the mental health initiative, but we have partnered with them to where they have offices in our schools. Therapists come into our schools and see students during the school day. So we do have that partnership and collaboration, which is amazing. But we are finding, and we're in rural area, I'm in Burlington, we're finding that Crosswinds Counseling can't find therapists. So they have been very short-staffed for 2 years. So that kind of goes back to not only within the schools, but in mental health in general, because preventative is where it's at. We need to be reaching all of these kids that even our mental health facilities can't find staff. So that has been our struggle. It's a great partnership, but they are struggling to find enough therapists to cover the need that we have. So yeah, I am not actually presenting. Jonathan took care of that for us, and I will stay on for questions later if there are any, but so I don't know who's next.
That would be great. We appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. Norella Munoz, I believe you have the floor. Go right ahead. Thank you for joining us.
Actually, thank you very much. Sam Jacobs, who is the other legislative co-chair for Kansas School Social Work Association, is going to be giving our testimony today.
Very good. Then we are anxiously awaiting that. So the floor belongs to Mr. Jacobs.
Hello, thank you.
Ms. Jacobs, sorry.
No, you're okay. We've just worked together very closely, Norella and I, so I think I'll read without being quite as shaky or nervous, I think she told me, so we'll try our best. So I don't want to reiterate many of the things that the school counselors and psychologists have done to a point where we're kicking a dead horse here. I'll read a little bit of mine, and then I've submitted my testimony for some of the details to be looked at, and of course we can answer questions. And I'll also speak a little bit to the partnership with the school or the school and the community mental health services that are taking place in school. My personal district does not do that. We receive a lot of students from 501 that previously were able to access that service, and I think that we're beginning to see that collaboration being important for our students. I'm Samantha Jacobs. I'm a school social worker in USD 345, the Seaman District, and Norella Munoz and myself are the co-legislative chairs for the School Social Workers Association. While impossible for my own experiences to speak to the entirety of school social workers in the state of Kansas, I do hope that the following testimony will provoke thought towards the support of Medicaid expansion, funding of the school mental health intervention program, and finally, the augmentation of current state incentives encouraging professionals to pursue careers in school mental health. School mental health refers to policies, practices, and procedures that address the mental wellness of students and staff in schools. This includes proactive efforts such as anti-bullying, suicide prevention, character development, positive behavior interventions and supports, and trauma-informed practices. This also includes intervention services such as social-emotional small groups and individual counseling. The key word to highlight in this description is proactive. I would like to take this opportunity to describe a scenario that is not uncommon for school social workers to respond to and speaks to the importance of a school social worker's proactive intervention, not only on students, but staff, parents, and community. We will call the student in this example Neil. Neil has 12 absences in his first semester of the school year. Neil has missed enough days to be truant and warrants a DCF referral. This makes sense to even an outside individual without knowledge of the education system. Students have to come to school. It is a requirement by law. If a child does not, DCF will then contact parents and enforce this law. Pretty simple. Now consider the role of myself as a school social worker with proactive supports in place. This DCF referral is avoided with the support of the student in an educational capacity and the family in a wraparound approach. This is what the scenario alternatively looks like. Neil puts his head down in class during most class instruction, communicates with peers during lunch and unstructured activities, but rarely communicates on the presented educational topics. Neil begins showing up late to school, then misses a few days because he is sick. This typically prompts the classroom teacher to inquire on absences with the attendance clerk or your front office if you're in a smaller building like mine. Finding that there is little communication with parents on file, that front office or the attendance clerk might send out an email to a social worker to put a student on the radar, as they call it. I then look into Neil's historical grades, speak with the school nurse, contact Neil's previous school social worker, and call Neil's father to set up a time to meet with him. After these tasks are completed, I have found out the following. Neil has struggled with academics for the last 2 years. Neil has off and on missed periods of school. Our school nurse has seen this child a few times for an upset stomach, but believes it might be a presentation of anxiety as there are no other accompanying physical symptoms. The previous school social worker informs me that Neil has been submitted for a special education evaluation in the previous year based on declining academic performance. Neil relocated before the evaluation was complete due to his parents separating and has now landed in a new district without an IEP or evaluation results. Neil's father expresses distrust in the social work profession, but agrees to come in and utilize our school food bank for a free holiday meal kit. I then discover that Neil and his father are homeless and staying with relatives here in Topeka. Neil's father is a seasonal worker and will not be able to secure housing until his tax return in 3 months. Neil has a history of trauma, including the loss of his biological mother to cancer and the recent loss of his stepmother due to separation. Neil does not currently have health insurance. Neil enjoyed school in his early years, but began to struggle with self-esteem and anxiety around academic tasks. Neil's father believes that he may have dyslexia as it runs in his family. Neil has begun presenting with a fear of becoming ill and has begun to question how his mother passed away. Before Neil's father leaves the building, I have referred Neil to Impact Avenues, a wraparound support for children experiencing homelessness in Shawnee County, an application for Medicaid and food stamps, a schedule of our school's upcoming food bank and clothing room opportunities, a referral to Family Service and Guidance Center for youth community mental health services, and a reward plan for Neil arriving at school each morning and checking in with the school counselor. Neil's father and I have set up a follow-up meeting for 2 weeks to discuss attendance. Neil's father has asked that the special education evaluation take place in this district as it was halted with the move. And as you can imagine, prior to COVID, these things might take place pretty quickly. When we have that influx of students coming into our buildings during the 6 months that our children were not in-person learning, there was a drastic slowdown in the interventions we were able to put into place. And the majority of students who came into our schools were struggling with truancy issues when they were getting started. And that then just delays our ability to be proactive. The complexity of this case is not unique in many schools across our state. School social workers, along with their duties to special and general education services, facilitate access to outside agencies and support students and family in meeting their basic needs through food and clothing resources. The past 12 months has presented unprecedented challenges to the Kansas education system for both educators and students. The impact of a pandemic that resulted in the extended removal of children from in-person learning environments has proven to delay the proactive efforts of school social workers, creating compounded needs that are greater than ever before. In a collaborative effort of testimonies, we ask of you to consider scenarios such as Neil's, the testimonies of school psychologists and counselors, and to go forward with support in mind for the following legislative items. Firstly, we support the expansion of Medicaid, which would provide approximately 165,000 Kansans with insurance to cover basic health needs. Lack of healthcare coverage is linked to a multitude of serious and costly consequences for individuals, families, and communities. Expanding CanCare allows low-income parents to care for their mental and physical health, in turn strengthening the family unit, reducing financial burden, and creating a more stable and safe environment for children. Many children will also have increased access to needed services, improving physical and mental health, and cutting back on time out of school. Additionally, expanding CanCare creates safer communities by decreasing the spread of communicable infections, viruses, and diseases, which now, since that is in the forefront of all of our minds, is probably one of the most pressing issues. Our second legislative priority is the full funding of the School Mental Health Intervention Program. This is the program that we asked the question about and connecting our schools with those outside community mental health agencies in a very close working relationship with school mental health professionals. During the 2019-2020 school year, over half of the students involved in the program showed improvement in attendance, academic performance, external behavior, and internalizing behaviors. Despite a 51% increase in the number of students receiving services and the addition of 23 school districts to the program, funding was only increased by 23% from the 18-19 to 19-20 school year. With adequate funding, this program could serve more students across Kansas with even better results. Thus, we encourage you to advocate for increased funding of this program, which would allow for its expansion to rural districts needing services, ensure that providers are being fully and appropriately compensated, and allow for more students to receive higher quality services. Our final priority is the augmentation of current state incentives encouraging professionals to pursue careers in school mental health. There is currently a shortage of school mental health professionals in Kansas school districts, especially in rural districts across western Kansas. School psychologists, school counselors, and school social workers must all receive a 4-year undergraduate degree and the minimum of a master's degree, in addition to postgraduate training and a certification licensure in order to be employed. Becoming a school mental health professional is not cheap, quick, or easy. Kansas needs to incentivize individuals to pursue a career in this field, with additional incentives for individuals located in rural and underserved districts. This could include loan forgiveness, reduced or free tuition at state colleges, and increased stipends. Without school mental health professionals, children and youth are more likely to display maladaptive and/or disruptive behaviors and would be at higher risk for suicide, untreated and/or chronic mental health issues, and undetected abuse and neglect. That specifically came up very often in the 6 months that our children were not in the building, and upon returning, realizing how those issues have really come to the forefront. Additionally, academic performance, social and emotional development, and student well-being and success would suffer. For these reasons, we feel that it is vital that incentives for school mental health careers be increased substantially. As my mentor often reminds me, there is a time for using big words and there is a time to speak simply to my point. School mental health professionals are vital in the success of students to have the tools that are necessary to overcome the challenges of today's society, receive an education to become successful functioning members of our society, and breaking cycles of poverty. Again, thank you for your time today and hearing the testimonies of school mental health professionals. We are able to answer any questions you may have regarding our testimonies or in regards to the challenge of returning students to on-site learning during this pandemic.
Very much for that. Committee, you also have a couple of emails with some testimony from John Smeaton as well as Dr. Judy Hugley, I believe, or hopefully I didn't butcher that name too bad. So definitely want to review those. I believe that's all we have as far as verbal or virtual presentations from folks. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. Any questions for the committee? Representative Wolf Moore.
Very much. First of all the presenters were fabulous. It was just a great job. And thank you for all you're doing. Samantha, I especially want to thank you for speaking so eloquently about Medicaid expansion. It would do all the things you said. In addition, I think now that the states around us have passed or in the process of implementing Medicaid expansion, they're able to lure many of our community mental health center employees and behavioral health professionals away from Kansas, especially if they're very close to the border, because they have so much more money infused because of all those federal dollars. I do have a question. So you're exactly right, and thank you so very much.
Thank you. It sounds like Representative Hubert has a question.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize I had unmuted. I wanted to thank all the presenters also, and thank my vice chair for doing a great job sharing today. I did get to listen to most of the presentation, and I think my question probably was for Norella, if I remember her name right.
Yes, that's correct.
Munoz, I believe.
Okay. You know, I know we've had discussion as far as the impact with the pandemic, and I believe we're taking the steps necessary to get back to in-person instruction. How do you bridge what's been lost over the last 11 months as we get back into in-person instruction? Do you currently now, even over the last 11 months, have you had the ability at all, especially with the at-risk and special needs students, to overcome what's been lost? Because that's the biggest challenge I think we have to face with is just what's all been lost in the last 11 months. So if you could respond to that briefly, I'd appreciate it.
Right. And I completely agree that, because of the fact that, we've been in a pandemic for almost a year now and students haven't been able to attend school fully in person, there has been, some loss in terms of, their academic learning and certainly, their social emotional growth. I believe that kids are really resilient. I don't believe that this has been a lost year. I do believe that, I can speak from my own experience in my own school district and the efforts that we've made to try to keep those connections with kids going. I have been on multiple home visits to see my kids that are on my caseload and other kids that I work with. I know teachers are reaching out by any means available, Zoom, phone calls, texts, just to make sure that kids know that we care about them, that we're here, and that, we're willing to do whatever it takes given, some of the parameters that we have to work with to ensure that they're getting their needs met.
Thank you.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This probably pertains to all the presenters. First, thanks for your time today and for all the information. It's very helpful. I don't have a very deep background in this, so maybe pardon my ignorance, but are the Kansas standards for having a master's degree for all these areas, is that standard across the country? And then how long have those standards been in place for that? Thank you.
Okay, so for school psychologists, that is a Kansas licensing standard. It's also the national standard that school psychologists have a specialist degree, which is beyond master's. There's been discussion like the APA, which is don't represent school psychs per se. The American Psychological Association has talked about doing like master's level, which would reduce some of that. My fear with that then is, I mean, you start losing quality and training. I mean, the additional training allows us to, provide the services, the higher need services. So yes, it's a national level standard for mental health professionals in schools. And the easy answer is let's lower the standard and let more people do it. But I think that you're going to lose a lot of quality. I know you're going to lose a lot of quality and training and background as far as interpretation of what the data is telling you, as far as being able to personally administer those services, even being able to measure how effective your programs are. You could set up a program and without being able to properly monitor how the progress is being measured and those types of things, you're going to lose a lot of. So I would urge you, and I know there's been talk about it even through the APA, but I would urge you not to lower those standards. It is a high bar, but I think it's there for a reason. And I think that when you talk about teaching math, that's a little bit different than teaching how to overcome toxic stress and how to overcome those what we call soft skills, which I don't think are soft at all. I just think you're talking about a whole different level of building people, and I don't want to water that down.
I can speak to the school counseling realm a little bit. I'll do it so to the best of my ability. School counselors follow ASCA standards, so they're our governing body, and they have certain standards that school counseling programs have to live up to. KCREP is our accreditation body for school counseling programs, and so accredited school counseling programs have to be between 48 and 60 hours. So it's an extensive program. It definitely is. And I would actually echo exactly what John said. I feel like it's necessary. I feel like I gained extensive knowledge in my program. And I was 12 hours shy of my LPC when I finished. So a private clinical counseling license. And now I actually hold it, as do a lot of school counselors. So I think it's important to note that we are licensed mental health professionals, and what John said is exactly correct. Trying to lower that number would be really scary and wouldn't prepare us as adequately. But I also think, like so many of the presenters discussed today, some sort of compensation for the programs and the requirements that we have when it comes to salary. I know as school counselors, we're actually on teacher salaries most often. So even though my master's level program requires many more hours than a typical master's program would, we're not actually given anything in return or incentivized in any way. And I think that would be huge for school counselors to have something like that in place so that they could, people would want to go into school counseling. I know a lot of people who are like, I don't know if I want to do admin or school counseling. Well, an admin program is 30 hours and a school counseling program is sometimes 60. So sometimes financially, it just makes more sense to go into an admin program rather than a school counseling or a school psych or a social work program. So I guess that would be my insight on that.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Byers, did you have a question?
I did, and thank you.
Awesome.
Something is wrong with my WebEx. My raise hand function does not work, and I can't chat with anybody.
So
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank the presenters. I was a public school teacher. I taught for 32 years, and my last year in the classroom was the 18-19 school year in Wichita schools. And so we were beginning to see access to mental health folks that were coming in to help out in the counseling situations, and what a great boon it is. I also greatly appreciated the fact that in your discussion, you mentioned those schools that were in person this whole time and increased challenges that youth have faced mental health wise during this pandemic. Because we've heard a lot about people that were in remote schooling and those impacts, but it's important that we note that it's not just remote, it is everybody who's had these issues. Thirdly, I also want to say thank you for explaining the vast amount of responsibilities that school districts assign to you beyond mental health. I think that's important for us to know and to consider as we move forward with this, that when a person says I'm a school counselor, oftentimes it doesn't involve spending a lot of time talking with students about mental health, but more time involved picking out classes and moving forward, and how each of these roles play. And maybe even if we could go into a little further depth on the school social workers and the roles they play beyond counseling issues.
Sure, I can definitely speak to that a little bit further, to the role that school social workers play. My position is actually funded by special education money specifically, which in short means that my paycheck comes from seeing the children with social work services prescribed to their IEP plans. My job certainly goes much further extensively after that description, including we are very lucky in my building to have a school mental health team that is comprised of our counselor, psychologist, our administration, and 2 social workers. But a lot of effort goes into just meeting the general education needs. I work in a Title I school. We have a very high population of impoverished individuals. We have started since I began there with myself and our other school social worker, Kelly Hegarty, a food and clothing bank that we run. We've actually become a full pantry. So we meet the basic needs of individuals. 2 times a month, we make sure to try to do that. We also have clothing for children. I can't express the amount of times that I've seen a child who is struggling and reached out to their parents and find out that these things are generationally compounded, that the parents themselves, when they were in school, they didn't know the role of mental health because it hadn't yet fully reached our districts across Kansas, that their needs were not met whenever they were in school. And also overcoming the negative stigma of social workers in that capacity. So it's been really, it's a blessing, but on top of what is written down on paper that I do, going into classrooms, doing Tier 1 services to help increase social emotional standards for children, going outside in the community and connections with Family Service and Guidance Center, working with those case managers. Often I'm probably in contact with probably 3 case managers a day. We have some therapy that happens in our building and facilitating that, and we are not part of that coalition to bring the school mental health into our school. So kind of running that on our own ship right now without the extra funding to support it. There's a lot. Norella, did I miss anything that you do in your job? I work at an elementary level, and Norella works in a high school, so that looks a little bit different.
You had also mentioned, this is Stacy, sorry, you had also mentioned the fact that you help provide families with those Medicaid applications for supports such as the SNAP program and things like that, because sometimes I find that they're not finding that in our communities. Over the last 10 or 20 years, all of those Social Security offices, all of those have closed, and they're only in big cities an hour away. And so for people that don't have transportation, they don't have ways to do that, and they don't have computers and internet to do that. A lot of that is online now. So I just wanted to mention that's one thing you said, which is so important, helping our families find the resources they need for those additional supports, which I think is a huge role. That's something our social workers do a lot of, as well as the rest of us as well too.
Yes, thank you, Stacy, for mentioning that. I guess it's kind of hard to remember all that we do. Part of that, I think, specifically that's been highlighted by this pandemic and the families becoming a very important role in our children's education by needing to facilitate that learning from home, is that we have found that a lot of parents and those compounded generational issues have their own mental health needs that are not being addressed. Unemployment was at an all-time high. The children were trying to read and do math with many parents who did not have that education background themselves, and which was increasing stress, highlighting the weaknesses for parents, and just really creating havoc in all of our communities. And we have exponentially increased our services to whole families to wrap around and support those families and get them in touch with services like Vallejo, our adult community mental health facilities, and getting those parents in touch with unemployment services and access to Wi-Fi and computers to do that. And sometimes in the case of just using the computer was a difficulty. So being able to operate a MacBook for them so that we can get that kind of thing done has been a very important part of our job, especially over the last year.
Thank you for that. I think sometimes we lose track of the fact that our public schools are so much a hub in the central of the community, and how our support services, especially with our social workers that are there, become those community liaisons, not just for the student, but also for the entire family, because we know the family health directly impacts the health and well-being of the student. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from the committee? I have a couple, but I will wait and see if anybody else has any more questions. Seeing none, Ms. Brown, I have a question for you. You said one of the things you would like is a mandate of counselors at a ratio of 250 to 1 as far as the students per counselor. What do you know what that rate is currently?
Yes, I think I have it right here. I just gotta look at it for a second. I believe 131 to 1 in Kansas. I just want to make sure I'm giving you the exact accurate number. Yes, 431 to 1. I can tell you my ratio at my high school is 366 to 1. So I asked my practicum students just last week what their ratios were, and not one of them were even close to the 251 ratio that's recommended by ASCA. Great question.
All right, very good, thank you. And then I have a question for Mr. Smeaton, if I could, please. You said 24% increase on ages 5 to 11 when you were talking about mental health, but I didn't catch the increase from 12 to 18-year-olds.
Okay, let me relook at that. Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I can get that for you here. Yeah, the percent of hospitalization, increase of hospitalizations. Just so I know where to look at. 24% increase, mental health emergency visits to hospitals to 511, 31% increase, ages 12 to 17. And again, those are all high school, elementary to high school age students.
Awesome, thank you. And last question for you, sir, if I could. You said 1 out of 5 prior to COVID students with mental health. Have you seen any data that would indicate the increase there? Just
So I have seen a ton of data, but I almost even put a statement in my thing, but then I could not trace it back to an actual document. So I do know that we've talked. So I also do a lot of work at the national level, just with our national association as well. And somebody had said, somebody from Michigan, again, I don't want to relate to Michigan, but had said that they had seen an increase of, they'd done a survey just in Michigan, and they were talking about kids who, before the pandemic, how many kids in the school saw their school counselor, and then while schools were closed, how many kids would like to see their school counselor or school psychologist or school mental health professional. And they had gone from like 35% of children knowing who those professionals were in the building, to about 70% wanting to get in contact with those individuals. Again, so whenever I've been in school, my district has been in school all year. So I don't want to speak on that. I do know that folks have reached out to me. Personally, I try to do a really good job of being visible. When you're in 3, 4, or 5 buildings a week, it's hard, but I try to be visible when I'm there. Kids kind of know who I am. But I've had kids who have sought me out this year more so than I ever have before. So if the services are there and available, we can provide them. But getting folks to understand that I can't see every kid, nor can anybody else see every kid in the building. That's where, and I can't be there every day. I'm serving 4, 5, 6 buildings. It's just really difficult. So again, it's that need for just more professionals in the building.
Very good, and I certainly appreciate what y'all have done there, and hopefully I have a question. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Relative to the issue of this 250 to 1, are there people available? I mean, could we even meet that standard? If it, obviously money is an object, but even if money wasn't, could that standard even be met?
That's a really good question. I think it would take some incentives to get more school counselors into school counseling programs. I honestly couldn't speak to how many students are coming out of our school counseling programs. I wish I had that data in front of me that I could give you. But I know that if we had programs in place like loan forgiveness, that we would have more school counselors available to meet those needs. I also know a lot of school counselors in my practicum that are looking for counseling jobs right now. So I think if we were to have more positions open, I think it would give people an idea of job security, and they would be more likely to enter into those programs as well. So I think it is an attainable ratio, and I think a lot of states have seen great success with getting close to that ratio, if not being there. And they've been able to hire counselors to do so, and licensed mental health school counselors is really important too. I think a lot of people are trying to put other people in school counseling roles that don't have the correct licensure, and that would be important to the Kansas School Counseling Association as well, is that we would keep up the idea that they be licensed school counselors filling those school counseling positions and vacancies.
Just as a follow-up, I know that a lot of times there are problems with shortages of teachers in rural areas. Do we find that there are the shortages in what you're talking about with counselors and psychologists and social workers in rural schools, or are those positions pretty well filled?
Absolutely. I think something that you'll find is that oftentimes those aren't tracked, school counselors being one of those positions that aren't tracked. I think also you will find that schools aren't marking that they are not able to hire school counselors if they're able to fill that position with somebody else who is not a licensed school counselor. I'm not positive that if that makes sense for you, but I know some districts will hire social workers in a school counseling role, or they'll hire other mental health professionals in a school counseling role that do not have the knowledge of comprehensive programs, and then they won't mark them as being positions that weren't filled. So sometimes it's hard to have accurate data on that as well.
This is Stacy Motti, president of the Kansas Association for School Psychologists. So a little bit of information from the school psychology perspective. We had a pretty significant shortage over the last several years, and some of our programs are finally increasing. I'm not sure what the secret is, but we're finally getting more students into those programs. So like Wichita State has a very large group of school psychology students right now, which is wonderful. We're finally making those gains. one of the things that we recently talked about this at our board retreat, and one of the things that we're seeing is some of those really rural areas like Western Kansas still continues to have significant shortages. And it is hard to track data for some of those reasons. One of the things we also look at is, you know, what job openings are out there. Well, some of those co-ops and districts in Western Kansas have just stopped advertising because they've gone for 5 years and they haven't been able to find an applicant. So they just don't advertise anymore, and they just make do with what we have, with what they have. So reaching out to those areas, and we had the conversation too where even when there were some loan forgiveness type programs, people just didn't want to be in those areas. So our young kids, I can say young kids because I'm retiring this year. Our young kids that are coming out of college are not wanting to go to Western Kansas. And some of them, even for loan forgiveness, aren't willing to go live somewhere that's 200 miles away from any large town or whatever. So that's one of the issues that we're having. And a lot of the people coming out, again, those young kids, they want to live in Kansas City or Wichita or Topeka and don't want to come to the smaller towns. In my own personal district, we are highly staffed, so we are able to meet those ratios. But I can see in rural districts that are much more rural, down in southeast Kansas and definitely Western Kansas, that is not the case. So continuing to try to get people into those programs. Also for school psychologists, we had what we call our WASP program, which was a work authorization where we could pull people from other professions and put them in a school psychology program. But we just can't do that with very many people. And I think Emporia State was the only university that was doing that. But the problem was they were seeking out counselors and school social workers to put into that program. So we were really robbing from Peter to pay Paul, which wasn't really what we want to do. Last year, when I presented to this committee, I suggested that we look at special education teachers to fill that role of school psychologists. I was one of those who did teach special education for years before going into school psychology. And my experience as a special education teacher was invaluable. So if we, instead of pulling from counselors and social workers to just have more school psychs, let's pull from special education teachers and put them in those types of programs. So just a little bit of background from our perspective.
I just want to say too, this is John Smeaton. Recently, I talked to the association. I don't even know what it's called. KC, Kansas Association of Special Education Administrators, principals, and the special ed directors, and just give me a ballpark figure. How many school psychs do you need? And the number we came up with was like 38 across the state. But here's the deal. Several of those administrators would say,
or something happened and she was kicked off. Now she cannot, on her State Issue laptop, cannot get it to connect to her Wi-Fi at home. Okay. But her other stuff is connected.
Sorry about that.
Okay. But the bigger issue, the statement that they made was, well, we really need 2 school psychologists at our co-op, but we would love to have 5. So I think the recognition for the need is out there. The question for all of us, I guess, is, how do we fill that need? And obviously money is always an issue. It always is. But what are the steps we need to take to help fill those roles?
I mean, I think it's important that we try to recruit people into these roles. Social workers are not going into counseling positions because we want to. It's just a matter of, there are not enough people graduating in counseling programs to fill the positions that are open. At least that is my understanding of it. I think a social worker is trained to be a social worker, and that's what we want to do. But I think in some districts that is happening, where in lieu of, they can't find a counselor, and so they think that the two are interchangeable, but they are not.
Very good.
Norella, I want to piggyback on from the social work perspective, I think that there is a little bit of a fear from the counselor's position and the social work position that some of those positions will be filled to the detriment of taking one of the other positions out of our school. And like Norella said, we become social workers because we want to be social workers. And while we would love to go in and work with children in any capacity that we're able to, and we'll take what is available, it's definitely not where social workers' heart would be and the social workers I've spoken to. And coming from a school that has a school mental health team that, as I previously said, has the school psychologist, the school counselor, 2 school social workers, and our administration meeting every week to meet the needs of our general education population and our special education population. Having all of those different, like-minded but different education backgrounds and roles coming together to meet the needs has dramatically increased the success of our students in our school, and actually gave us the ability to come to the Capitol last year and speak to what that program looks like as a group of us. And I don't think that taking one of us out of that scenario would ever be beneficial for our students.
Very good. Any other questions for our conferees from the committee? Seeing none, we certainly appreciate y'all. Everything you do, we appreciate, and it was a great presentation, and we thank you very much for coming today. If there's nothing else for the good of the committee, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.